We have our first speaker, Wanless, and he doesn't know we started his 5 minutes, so he's using it as he walks up here.
If I don't have one, I'll go up to my office and get you one. Let me see if I've got
The first paper is entitled "The Coming Reality of Sea Level Rise: Too Fast, Too Soon." Dr. Harold Wanless is a professor and chair of the Department of Geological Sciences at the University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida. Professor, we start the 5 minutes now. So, thank you.
And I'm watching it. I have some slides, please. And it's certain now that climate change is real and it is human produced. What most people don't understand, and this is the sobering hair on the back of your neck part, is that 93% of the global warming heat that we have put in the atmosphere is in the ocean. If it was just the atmosphere, we could turn this around very easily. We have created something we're into for centuries. And this is why my paper says that we cannot reverse the sea level rise, because the warm water is getting in under the outlets of the oceans, of the ice sheets on Greenland and Antarctica. And it is speeding up ice melt. The U.S. government projections presently are shown up on the slide here. The lower two do not include accelerating ice melt, so they're not meaningful. The upper two are for limited ice melt acceleration this century, and the other one, the higher one, which is 6.6 feet by the end of the century, is for the maximum modeled projection of ice melt acceleration. We'll continue warming the ocean and expanding that too. But we should be planning with that 6.6 feet, because many of the accelerating feedbacks we are seeing with ice melt in Greenland, Antarctica, and the Arctic Ocean are not in these models. And so this, I think, is the low-end projections. So if you look at 6.6 feet, we're going to be at 2 feet in 2048. That's barely a mortgage cycle. We'll be at 3 feet by 2065. All the barrier islands of the world will be being abandoned. Wow. Let me show you something else about sea level rise. My colleague Al Hine is right here on one of the debaters, but many of us have been looking at the history of sea level rise. And you can see our last interglacial sea level was up 20 feet. The coldest part of the ice age, sea level was down about 450 feet. Our continental shelves were exposed. And then it's how we got from that 18,000 years ago to today, which is very important. And you think, oh, well, the climate warmed, the ice sheet gradually melted and responded. No, what we see littered all across the continental shelves are ancient reefs, ancient barrier islands, just stranded there and suddenly just left by a pulse of rapid sea level rise. And so this is sort of what pieces of our climate, of our sea level history out of the last ice age looks like, out of the last 18,000 years. That's in meters, but it's for 420 feet up. It's these pulses of rise as some ice sheet sector disintegrates, one after the other. It's important that you understand that the U.S. government projections are serious. 6.6 feet is serious. But you also must understand they do not take into account how sea level rise worked in the past, and they do not incorporate many of the reinforcing feedbacks that are accelerating ice melt on Greenland, Antarctica, and the Arctic Ocean. We should plan for 6.6 feet. Then we can up it or slow it down depending what really happens. But that's what we should be doing. Let me show you Miami-Dade County on the left and Broward County, Fort Lauderdale on the right very quickly here. And this is LIDAR imagery. Here's 1 foot of sea level rise, 2 feet by maybe 2048. You start seeing areas getting wet on the backside of our coastal ridges. 3 feet, 4 feet by later in the century. Fort Lauderdale is getting very swampy, very serious. So this is just normal high tide. 5 feet, 6 feet by the end of the century. Only 44% of Miami-Dade County remains. Only 1/4 of that 44% is above 2 feet above sea level. 7 feet, 8 feet later in the next century. unbelievable how low we are. And this, Naples doesn't think they're part of the story. They think it's a Miami problem. No, they're worse than we are. And you have some nice high land around here. I hope you're building on it and using that. Let's go up to 10 feet. 9% of Miami-Dade County is above 10 feet. Unbelievable. We live in the most beautiful spot on earth in Central and South Florida. I think you all agree with that. We don't want to live in Boston and New York. So let me just show you our city of Coral Gables. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. We're the high part of Miami-Dade County. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And the first question to Phil Stoddard. Remember to please punch your microphone, please.
So, Hal, a couple days ago, that the sea level rise conference held by the French consulate in Miami, glaciologist Eric Rignaud reassured my wife, who was there, that the maximum sea level rise that would be seen in this century is 6 feet, given the known ongoing processes. And he said it would take new unknown processes to produce more rise than that. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
Yeah, Eric is one of these glaciologists that really gets it. But there's something about the potential for rapid acceleration of ice melt that's missing in all the models and all the understanding. It seems like every geologist I know who sees the past and understands how fast ice can disintegrate once it starts to melt think very differently. We only have to look at the Arctic Ocean, where you have floating pack ice. And it was, in 2002, we thought it might be melted by 2070. It's probably going to be ice-free in the summer this decade. All the people working in the modern really don't get how the feedbacks can accelerate and soften and speed up ice. So, but again, my recommendation is everybody here, every community here ought to be planning for 6.6 feet. Because then you see the reality of what you're in for. And you ought to plan by every 6 inches sea level rise, what do you have to do to maintain your infrastructure? What do you have to, how much does it cost? Once you do that, you can speed that up or slow it down. Once you have, if you don't, we're going to see a collapse of civilization. We're already seeing it in other parts of the world because of drought.
Ken Bryant?
Yes, I'm a physician, and I didn't see anything in your paper or the other two papers relative to health issues and sea level rise. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, that's a little out of my expertise, but we are warming. We are having new disease vectors moving north. One thing I find fascinating is in southeast Florida, we put on all these drainage canals to get rid of mosquitoes, and they work quite well. But now as we move up another foot, another 2 feet, we're going to have ponded water everywhere, and it's going to become a mosquito hell. So and there's so many other things that are a problem. I'm probably not the right person to answer the health vectors, but we do training in South Florida, and we have long talks on this by qualified people. It's serious.
Do you have a comment about that, Mr. Bryant? Do you have a perspective? Let's push it. Yeah.
In general, we know that climate change in general, with the particulate matter in the atmosphere, certainly leads to more asthma, and of course African Americans are affected more severely with asthma, and disproportionately affected, the higher death rate and all of that. So that's one issue, and like you mentioned, all of the organisms, mosquitoes, et cetera, in the atmosphere can certainly contribute to some of these diseases as well.
You all should know we're 5 days downwind from the Sahara, and from the Saharan dust, and from whatever other living things are in that dust. So, interesting.
Ken Welsh?
Thank you, Dr. Wanless. One of your recommendations was implementation of the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact. Can you talk about one or two of the most effective adaptive strategies that are included in that?
There are thousands of them, and I'd almost rather comment on what the counties are basically doing with those recommendations. Every county has accepted this compact recommendations. By the way, we're just revising the sea level projection for up to 6.6 feet. That's just being done this week. I mean, we're finished it. And, but every county has accepted them, and essentially the counties have put them on the shelf and not done much with them. And that's the real problem, that there's everything from conservation to proactive documenting. Did it go off? No. It's on.
Yeah, it went off.
Documenting what you have, what your infrastructure is at every foot or half foot of sea level rise, and finding out how much it's going to cost to implement an upgrade to maintain the infrastructure for communities and how much it costs. And once you do that, it becomes so clear that at 1.5 foot sea level rise, this sector of the community you can no longer maintain.
Richard Jacobs?
Yes, sir. For many, from conversations, something that happens at the end of the century is not our problem, it's our kids' problem, so let's not do anything. But in the meantime, between now and then, can you discuss storm surge, what would be a prelude to the sea level rise, the effect in the short term?
Yes, but let's look back at that 6.6 by the end of the century. That's 2 feet by 2048. That means on Miami Beach, you probably will not have insurance by 2048, even if you're trying to live there. You will not be able to sell your house. That's barely a mortgage cycle away. So we're really headed, this isn't something for our grandchildren. The only thing for our grandchildren is a condo on Miami Beach that you can't sell that you thought was an investment for them. Storm surges, to my understanding, will become exponentially more damaging as sea level rises. You may think of storm surges as flooding your house or your condominium. No, it's the full power of the ocean being pushed by 100, 150 mile-an-hour winds through your neighborhood at 2 to 10 feet elevation, and you will be flattened. And this will just become exponentially more serious as sea level rises. And you know, if you only get a half foot of water because of storm surge, no, you're not going to have your house flattened. But once you're at 3 feet with waves on top of it, boy, I mean, this is, and again, the insurance industry is going to decide what we do with our future. We have, and the bond rating firms, because they're our future. If you don't have a good bond rating, your community can't get the money to do what you want. And if you can't have insurance, nobody can buy your house on a mortgage. So this is a horrendously serious problem coming up. And believe me, the insurance, reinsurance, and bond rating companies know more about this than most of the scientists in the room here, because they have to. They're putting all their marbles into this, or else they're going to pull them out.
Richard Conrad?
Yes, I'm a retired physician.
We'll have to pull, many of these you'll have to pull a little closer to you.
Yeah.
Please.
As a follow-up to Dr. Bryant's response, do you have recommendations in your policies other than this paper concerning how we're going to deal with the colossal humanitarian needs and suffering that occurs with this?
What we've been trying to do in South Florida is to get communities to figure out what they have and plan. And the way I see it is if we plan honestly, and you see I'm making proposals not to just keep rebuilding everything to the last second and then we run, because that's going to hurt the people and the communities. We're going to be the new Okies that have lost everything, the Floodies, I guess we are. And if we don't do that planning, if we don't set aside money to help people relocate, we're going to see a collapse of civilization. And I think that's the most fundamental thing. If we can have honest, transparent planning by cities, counties, and state and federal government. Right now, we're hoping that we can turn sea level around. We can't turn sea level around because we've warmed the ocean.
I appreciate that, but you mentioned the African dust. That's a problem. It's already invasive. The kudos vine is already invading areas of the northeast United States. It would seem to me like you could nicely create a crisis over some of those pieces of information and get governmental or somebody's attention to that.
Well, yeah, and I agree with you, but my study is on sea level, and I see sea level as the foundation problem because of global warming for South Florida. And I'm just trying to get people, as are many others, to wake up to this. You know what's waking people up is maybe I can't sell my house. And that first graph I showed with the warmings in the ocean, those are the real things that we have to plan for and be aware of. And once you get the reality, it's a very different story. I get people calling all the time about should I hold on to both my properties on Miami Beach? It's like, well, maybe not.
Maybe not. Yeah. Russell Meyer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wanless. I have a technical question and then a policy question. Technical one I think can be pretty simple. Do your projections include what will happen to the karst and the sponge-like limestone and land collapse? And secondly, with fundamentalism sitting at the power seat in policy making, talk about apocalypse actually feeds into their narratives about the world. And your last sentence talks about chaos and civilization disappearing. So it seems to me the conversation, when it goes into apocalyptic terms, actually feeds those policymakers to not act rather than to act because of their fundamentalist narrative.
I get to use a line I've always wanted to use in a minute. But first, much of South Florida and Central Florida is underlain by unbelievably porous limestone. I'm not sure the sea level rise is going to so much accelerate the collapse of the limestone, but what it's going to do is prevent the Dutch from helping us too much, because we can put all the levees and dikes we want around ourselves, but as sea level rises, the water will just come up through. We will not be able to keep it out like New Orleans and the Dutch have. And my comment to your second question, I don't know if that answers, but I don't see collapse as being a big problem. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe Al Hine or something has something else on that.
Well,
but
I've seen some studies that have shown that it dissolves the sponge-like, and so that's why I was wondering.
yeah, a lot of our sinkholes are plugged up with organic matter and sand, and often when it's dry, they will be like an hourglass and just drain out, but also maybe when they're wet. With respect to religious groups, there are some that say, oh, the second coming, bring it on. Well, my comment to them, and I've talked to the 700 Club and everybody, because everybody's in this boat together, and my comment is that you should hope your God doesn't come back right now, because he's going to be really pissed at how you managed his earth. So, and I think, and most religious groups are starting to understand that and becoming very involved. There was a petition by 70,000 evangelists to meet with Governor Scott about climate change. He rejected it. He didn't have time to meet with them.
Okay, Al Hite?
Yes. In full disclosure, Hal and I go...
You need to pull it closer to you, I'm sorry. Just
Hal and I go way back. We're old friends. I'd like to get back to the science a little bit. The sea level rise curve prior to today is looks quite a bit different than the projections, in that the historical sea level curves are quite irregular and quite jerky, and they're catastrophic events, and the catastrophic events, short period, of sea level rises have been demonstrated quite clearly. But the future sea level rise is a smooth exponential curve. But it's probably not going to behave that way. It'll probably behave the same way as it has in the past. So what are the glaciologists, what is their thinking now as far as catastrophic sea level rises occurring over 5, 10, 15 year time frames rather than this gradual exponential rise?
Well, yeah, most of the curves are something like this or something like this, and our leading climatologist, he's not a glaciologist, Jim Hansen, who is in 1980 was speaking to Congress, 1980-81, telling us what it was going to be like in the year 2000 because of global warming. He's right on, and what he has been putting out since about 2007 is there a good chance we'll be at 5 meters at 16, 17 feet by the end of the century. He just came out with a very strong paper, and he gets the concept of ice sheet disintegration. And there was a model came out, I've been criticizing models, but there was a model came out in 2009 that said, if I have a big piece of ice, like Greenland, I could melt it in 1,000 years if I warmed the atmosphere. If I fractured it every 20 meters, so the meltwater could dribble down and soften the ice and so on, I could melt it in a couple decades. And that seems to be the reality that at least I see from how ice works. Sometimes scientists are too close to their little area to see the bigger picture, I think. So you can comment if you want on.
Well, I think people should realize that it's probably not going to be an exponential rise or slow exponential rise.
No.
It'll be jerky. There'll be periods of still stand and periods of very rapid rise, if the past is any kind of predictor of the future. And so is it possible to predict those very sudden catastrophic rises that may occur in a 5-10 year period where sea level just goes crazy for a short period of time and then there's a still stand?
We see happening in the last decade. Ice melt in Greenland and Antarctica really seems to have picked up about mid-1990s. We now have the warmed ocean water getting deeply in under the outlet fjords and glaciers of both Greenland, under the West Antarctic ice sheet area, and now under the East Antarctic ice sheet area. And for instance, Lynn and I were up in Greenland a couple of years ago, and the front of the ice coming to the collapsing calving face in the Jakobshavn Fjord it picked up from a couple miles forward speed of the ice a year to about 20. And it was like 4 big calving events a day. It was spectacular. And this summer, over a 4-day period, 5 miles of ice came in out of that fjord because of the warm water getting underneath. This, as far as I can see, is starting to spin out of control. The warmed ocean water is getting in and melting ice over 100 miles in under the fjords in the East Antarctic ice sheet under it. And this was not happening in 1990. This should be very worrisome. And this is probably the beginning of one of these rapid pulses of sea level rise.
Sharon Joy Leitch.
Good morning.
Thank you. Appreciate your fine summary in your paper and
Thank
this
you.
morning. And I'm jumping ahead, as this is part of the deal, is policy issues.
Good.
And actually your last item. That's my proclivity, is what are we going to do about it, and where the rest of us, where we folks as part of this conversation. So your final point is initiate intensive education for the affected public. And it seems to me you have such a great opportunity down there in your neighborhood in Miami, because I understand 2 of your congressmen are supporting a resolution that was proposed last week, I believe, among the Republicans, that this is indeed a serious moral issue. And I understand there's a King Tide tour planned. And what I thought might be helpful to help educate the public is for these representatives to invite their fellow neighbors, the 2 folks who are running for presidency, Jeb Bush and Rubio, to come with them on the King Tide Tour, because as I understand it, they are not believing that this is real. So it seems like this is a great opportunity for policy among decision makers to not hear a lecture, but to actually experience it. And as I understand from watching the mayor on TV the other night, there are fish swimming out there in the streets. Thank
Wow,
you.
you gave a lot of things to talk about. First of all, there's something called the Climate Lobby that Jay Butera has been lead. It's a global thing or a national thing. And their sole purpose is try to create a carbon tax through Congress. And he led a charge to try to get every Republican congressman south of Orlando to sign on as co-sponsors of this climate change bill in the Congress. And you can thank Jay and the mayors of South Florida who met with Ileana and others to make this happen. But they're starting to get it, that the areas they're in charge of are highly, highly at risk. And it's a pretty sad statement that we have two presidential candidates that live in South Florida, in the Miami area, in the county, that don't buy into this and mistakenly think the economics make it impossible to deal with and blame the Chinese. No. Per capita, we're still the problem. And a lot of what they're doing there is making crap for us to buy. So, you know, it's really a very misguided thing. The world is waiting for the United States to show the leadership in this, and they will follow. Europe's already ahead of this. India's balking because they're still trying to get their economy and industry up where they want it to be. But, yeah, you had so many questions in there. What was the...
Well, to conclude, you have a great learning opportunity available in your neighborhood this month.
We do. And believe me, Lynn and I met with Rubio at a fundraiser back when he was running for Congress. I handed him a letter. I'd already mailed him one saying I'd be glad to put together a group of top scientists to help him understand the reality of climate change. And he looked at me and he said, "You really believe this is real?" I said, "I don't believe, I know it's real." And then somebody, the Tea Party or something, gave him another agenda he had to follow to get elected, and he did that. But, you know, the only purpose, in my understanding, of an elected official is to protect the health, welfare, and safety of the businesses and the people in their community or county or state. And if you've sold your soul to somebody else, you're not serving any intended democratic purpose.
Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate the fact we have short questions and short answers.
I'm not good at short answers.
But we have a couple questions in the audience. So all this conversation is extremely productive, no doubt about it. But we want to make sure we don't wander into the parochial too much, either side of the conversation you're on. These are great suggestions, don't mishear me, but we want to stay with the evidence of the science and what the meaning for the community is, so appreciate that. We have a couple questions in the audience. If you want to identify yourself, please raise your hand. As the ice sheets melt in Greenland and Antarctica, is water evenly distributed across the globe, or are some areas impacted more than others? Anybody want to identify themselves?
Over there.
Okay, there we go. There's the question.
If you throw more ice cubes into your pool, they will affect the whole level of the pool. There are many things that affect local sea level, including the speed of the currents and so on. You know, an iceberg rides above water level. It floats like an ice cube, with about 6/7 of it or so below the water level. Around Antarctica right now, the water level around Antarctica is about 8 inches higher than the rest of the ocean. That's because so much fresh water is coming out that it's behaving sort of like a giant iceberg around. So it is higher because of the fresh water, and that'll gradually mix and spread out through the rest of the world's oceans. That also is why we had the most extensive floating pack ice last winter, July, in Antarctica. And the deniers said, oh, that means climate change is over. No, that means it's easier to freeze fresh water than salt water.
Second question, how does sea rise phenomena affect agriculture? Person, anybody?
Right here.
Okay, there you go.
Look at all the deltas of the world. I told you that with a 3-foot rise of sea level, most of our barrier islands are going to be being abandoned, and we're going to have a huge migration of, they're not political refugees. I don't know if they're economic refugees. They just have to get away from the water. But we're going to have to incorporate them into society all over the world. The deltas, some of them are a little higher, but so much agriculture is in our deltas that this should be of massive concern to this last sentence I have about diving into chaos and civilization collapsing. Our food resources are so critical. There was just a study, I have it with me if you want to look at it. There was a competition to see how to save the Mississippi Delta. And every engineering firm and everything else that looked at this said you should abandon the lower delta and trap the sediment, helping to try to hold on to the upper part of the delta above New Orleans. Wow. Wow. And that wasn't some group of scientists saying it. That was a competition of how to design a program to save the delta. Can't.
Sorry.
Sea level rise. Not enough sediment to keep up with sea level rise. We've already degraded it to the point that to turn it around is impossible. And that's a major step. And they won't, we did this back right after Katrina. There was a major group. I gave talks to the governor, to the Council of Environmental Quality on the White House, all of their invitations about how to do this. Oh, we can't do that. That would sacrifice Jefferson Parish and so on. So we can screw it up, but we can't undo it. And now with sea level rise, wow.
The Institute convened a meeting at Cornell University last year. It's a signature meeting, 4 days, and the book from that is outside. It was on the effective environment on agriculture, so you might have an opportunity. David Clement.
Thank you, Dr. Wanless. And my question builds on Dr. Conard's earlier question about solutions, but more specifically, if you were czar of Florida or even the U.S., what would be the actions you would take to deal with not a 0.6 foot rise by the end of the century when everyone in this room will be gone, and even maybe our grandchildren, maybe a few of them will still be here, or a 3-foot rise by 2065 when few of us will be here, but a 2-foot rise in 2048 when most of us hope to be here. What would you do first?
What would I do first?
If you were czar, you had a czar-like authority, because it seems to me what you're saying almost would require us as a country to do such authority, such power.
Yeah, they say, when you tell about sea level rise, you're called a saint because you're informing people. When you tell them what to do, you're called a dictator and a czar and a bad guy. But it's very hard on a 2 to 4 year, 6 year election cycle to really affect change and get reelected, because there are a lot of uncomfortable things to do. If I were czar, I would first have every community and county give honest, open, transparent analysis of what they have, what they're working with. I would make sure that, and the economics of maintaining the infrastructure and the honest conclusions of combining all that to realize when you can no longer, either economically or because of safety, maintain a viable infrastructure for certain sectors of the community. And I've put things in there about stopping massive developments on low-lying areas and barrier islands. 2048 is not very far away. I would have the governments work with all the insurance and reinsurance companies to come to an agreement that this community, sector of a community at another 1.5 foot of sea level rise or 2 or whatever it is, will no longer be able to be covered by insurance. That's a reality. We can plan for this, you know, and yeah, there are others.
Okay, Peter Clark.
So this is kind of a similar type of question. You made a very interesting comment earlier on that the insurance industry maybe knows more about sea level rise than many of the scientists around the country. Well, what are they doing about it now? What kind of things are they looking at in the future? And how will the insurance industry kind of drive the public perception, public identification of the problems, and what ultimately they will need to do in the future?
I can't speak for the insurance company, but it's obvious that there are many homes being bought today in Florida that probably will not be sellable within the end of the mortgage cycle. They're too low. I was over on Miami Beach. Can we show that little clip I had? Is that possible? I have about a 20-second clip that drives home I was over with a lady from the New Yorker magazine, and she was looking at the king tide and talking about sea level rise. So here we see the canal that the water's coming in down the street. This is like, this climate change sucks, you know? I mean, look at this. And to use the kids' terms, look at this. Here's your garage you're supposed to drive into. And the water is absolutely pouring in. I mean, we are at such risk right now. And I was talking to the people there. Look at this. This is unbelievable. And we're going to, another foot on top of this? Another 2 feet on top of this? People are starting to move off Miami Beach. They've had it. And so I appreciate the dean's concerns and the hopes that we can turn this around. But with the warmed ocean, we can't. This is what we're in for, and we should plan honestly for it. And we shouldn't let things like that, or 230 new condominium buildings are being built in Miami-Dade County right now on Miami Beach, other areas, no consideration for location, elevation, infrastructure, quality of the concrete with respect to seawater.
Okay, so we're about halfway through the debate, believe it or not. So I know you have a lot of questions. We're going to go as quickly as we can. I'm on the advisory board for Swiss Re, which is the largest reinsurance company in the world.
Yes.
So I'm going to tell you what they're going to do.
I want to hear.
They're going to do two things. One is they're going to, as you said very correctly, going to offer policies that are not very attractive, or no policies. And they're going to undercut your bank account in the stock market, because the impact of those insurance company decisions will influence every company that has an investment anywhere in the portfolio. A lot of companies have land, have corporations, buildings on land that are impacted by your point. The only thing I'd like to do now at this juncture in the debate is shift as much as we can to the questions that have been implied, if I can, Hal. You were offered the position of benevolent dictator a moment ago, I think, right? I think it's a 5-year appointment. You get to live in Switzerland in the mountains, well up and away from the water. I think it would be very helpful to this community if we focused on what people want to suggest that you're going to do. We know there's a problem. You beautifully described it, illustrated it with part of the community which is relevant to certainly St. Petersburg. Why don't we now shift as much as we can on suggestions and see if people want to support them. Okay, maybe you should not be able to live on a barrier island. Kelly, Hammer, Levy.
Okay, I will try to get my question in that frame. You made the comment that infrastructure services would have to be discontinued from certain sectors because of unacceptable risk or cost. However, governments have obligations to maintain roads and bridges and drainage systems in order to provide access to private property. There are private property rights. If the government fails to act, we may be charged with taking. Old A1A in St. Johns County was washed away, and the county decided not to maintain it. 28 residents out there sued. They came together and ended up settling it, but they did have a constitutional obligation to maintain that road for those residents, and so they will. How do we address this issue?
Are there any college students here? Welcome. These are the questions you're going to face. Any field you go into, from law to architecture, everything else, it's going to be a new ball game. We have property rights. Yeah, that's going to be interesting to watch. We have obligation rights. You're right. But we can't bankrupt the city to maintain a bridge to some community that's underwater out there half the time. The big thing right now in Miami area is that everybody owns their seawall. And so you can get 98 of these people to up their seawall to block the high tide or slow it down, and 2 people don't. Doesn't work. So all the cities and community areas are looking at trying to do what you would call takings, to gain control of the seawalls for the benefit of the public. The Dutch are amazing at this. They say they're more fiercely independent than we are, and that may be true. But they know when the government comes and says, I have to do this for the good of the country, they will do that. And so there's going to be huge challenges in law, and there are many good lawyers right now working with the legal needs and consequences. But we're entering a new world where the old rules aren't going to apply. And I heard a minute ago that we're all going to be dead by the time this is serious. No, it's not. The students, most of our freshmen are 18 or 19 years old. They're going to be working because of health till they're 80, at least, and unless they win the lottery. And so they, that's 2095. That's all the way through the century that you are preparing your life for. So you need to understand this so that you know how to go in and make a real difference. I don't know if that helps. But
Can I ask a question between the two of you? Are you saying you should change the constitutional responsibility of government to the citizens based on a rational understanding of the risks that have been described so beautifully here? Yes? No? Both answers are acceptable.
By the way, I'm not a lawyer. Okay.
Well, you shouldn't be so proud of that fact. I mean, here's a lawyer here who's going to help us in a minute.
I'm not a lawyer. I'm a natural resources manager, but one of the things that I'm responsible for is stormwater. And we are already experiencing extreme challenges in some of our communities, even though I'm dealing with a community right now that is further inland, but where their system ultimately outfalls is into the Gulf of Mexico, and it's the tidal condition that is keeping the system from leaving. So, I don't know, if we have a lawyer in the room, I don't know how we would change
the answer was yes or no.
Okay, Kelly as czar, yes, change it.
All right. Can I interrupt you just for a second?
She's an expert. She gets to elaborate.
All right. Just if you can give me a second. We have an attorney. Please comment on it.
Well, I would also like to chime in and have my...
Mike, gotta get to the mic.
I would also like to have my colleague, Paul Boudreau, who is a land use lawyer, chime in on this as well. Because but as far as the Constitution element, the interesting thing about Florida is that it probably has some of the most stringent protections for the environment of any state constitution in the U.S. And we run roughshod over those. So it doesn't matter really that we have the provisions in them. The problem is the people who are dealing with the constitutions are at the highest levels of state government. They're just ignoring them. We are actually several groups are in the process of bringing constitutional lawsuits against the government for their failure to uphold the Constitution. Of course, the only way to change it is by the people themselves. And that's where this tension comes in, because if it's going to cause you to lose property rights and property value, why are you going to vote something out? You want what is yours.
Okay. Okay, so
that's
far?
fine, yes.
There's no enforcement. Mr. Boudreau. Microphone, please.
it's been suggested that perhaps what we could do is to tell the owners of the condos at St. Pete Beach and Miami Beach, sorry, you're out of luck. Your entire life savings are going to be wiped out because you chose to follow the insurance and the various encouragements that the American nation has made over the past 200 years to live on the beach. You're the ones who are going to have to suffer. I suggest that politics will never allow that. The experiences in New Orleans, in Sandy, and the recent attempts to raise a little bit the insurance rates in Florida, which Floridians rejected, that is a non-starter as a political alternative. And then I'm wondering, what do you do to the residents of Miami Beach or St. Pete Beach who say it would cost hundreds of billions of dollars to buy us out? Wouldn't it be cheaper to dump sand and rocks and raise the level of our Barrier Islands of 6 feet, which sounds preposterous, but is arguably cheaper than having to buy out the hundreds of thousands of people that live in the Barrier Islands?
If we were going to be living in the future at 5 feet above present sea level, that might be fine. Galveston did that after the 1900 hurricane. They lifted the houses up and put in 8 feet of sand underneath, and it's still not often flooded. The problem is that even with the U.S. government projections, if we follow those, when we're at plus 5 feet, we'll be rising at a foot per decade, and it'll be faster and faster because of the way ice melts. So this spending money on building up your Barrier Islands is not, in the long run, a good idea. There's a number of things showing that some of our short-term fixes make longer-term disasters, bigger disasters, because people think, oh, it's okay now. Miami Beach, which has a huge bed tax, so it can do things most of us can't do. And it's spending $400,000 on the west side of Miami Beach trying to eliminate flooding. They're not doing too good a job, as I showed you. And
that's 400 million, not 400,000.
400 million, yeah. And they're also raising roads. Well, that's nice. Now the water used to drain from your property to the road. Now it's the other way. So you're going to have to build up your property and your home.
So I want to be very clear. We had 4 comments before we go on to other topics. What I hear is there's a sentiment that people will have to drive the process, and that from a scientific, well-studied point of view, you're going to have to do something like that in order to get actionable next steps.
Yeah, we need to educate the electorate about the seriousness and the imminentness and the reality and the non-reversibility of this.
Okay.
And by the way, we have to get hold of climate change. We have to stop putting fossil fuels in. We have to start pulling CO2 out. But the warmed ocean is still with us, and we can cool down the atmosphere, and that's an important step. Otherwise, we're going to be an unlivable planet at the rate we're going.
Okay, just for fun, before we go on, how many people at the debater table would support that approach? Raise your hand. The approach that says there's a legal responsibility to look at constitutional relationships to property owners, and that in the moment they're not being enforced, the laws apparently, you say, exist, they're not being enforced, and that in fact we're using those laws or modifications of them, there's going to be a need to present this information to convince people to attack the constitutional responsibility between government and property owners. That's the big issue you raised, right? You did it, right? It was your fault. Well, right now, is that an option? Would anybody support it? You can just say no, you won't support it.
George, could you kind of rephrase that again so that maybe it's a little clearer for everyone?
I thought it was very clear, actually. So, people have been describing the problem for about 45 minutes. We had somebody very courageously said they have a constitutional responsibility to landowners, property owners, all right? And that's preventing any type of practical, scientifically rational approach to solving the climate issues that pertain to roads and property and garages and so forth. So if you want to get to the problem, because it hasn't solved it yet, you're going to have to go to the question of the responsibility in the Constitution that relates property to the government. When do you have a house on an island? It's your responsibility. If it washes away, we're not coming to replace it. If the road down the street washes away because it's in South Miami or something, it's your problem. You live there. Well, I just want to know, we'll go on just a second.
Well,
Okay, quickly.
Okay, I think that isn't what Lance was saying. The issue of constitutional responsibility is to all of the people to take care of the environment so these problems do not occur. It is not merely to protect the property owners. Maybe Lance could restate this a little more clearly.
What I heard Lance and other people say, there are laws on the books where people can sue over their responsibility as landowners, not to the environment. Which is the priority, the environment or the land?
That's where the tension is, right there. There are both responsibilities. And right now, we actually are protecting property.
Okay.
We're protecting the welfare. We need to focus
That's the priority,
more on
in other words.
but we need to focus, I agree with Dick, we need to focus on the constitutional provisions in the Florida Constitution that require the government to take care of the environment.
Okay. Yeah, I think you were agreeing with me.
Yes.
George,
Okay.
I've been over in Sanibel, invited over to testify about the beach because suddenly somebody's living room is on the beach, and they put a big red sign, you move your living room. And because they value themselves for the beach, for the environment, rather than the structure on the beach, and they make them move it.
Okay.
It can be done.
I would point out that federal law supports the fact that if you build a house in the mountains on federal property, you have 10 years, and 10 years later you can be told to remove your house because it's federal property, okay, not private property.
Wow.
So we can go on just quickly. How many people would think that's the most ridiculous thing you could imagine, is actually looking at the relationship of the constitutional responsibility of government to property owners versus the environment? Not going to do it. Okay, we'll go on. Next question, Libby. Maybe this is why I had to give up lecturing. I don't know.
I should point out that both governors...
Libby, let's just go on. This is a dead end. So, Libby.
Actually, I think it's a great question. If you could just turn it around, how many people here would support the idea that government has certain rights or certain obligations to take care of all the people at the expense of the individual?
Well, that's a pretty easy one. How many people in favor of that one? Well, maybe it isn't so easy. Raise your hands high enough so we can see. We have a responsibility to all the people rather than individuals. Well,
No, wait a second. You keep changing the question. The question is, should property have priority over people, or should people have priority over property?
Is that the question you'd like to vote on?
No, because it's people's property.
We're moving on. Libby.
Okay. I want to get back to the science just a little bit. We do have a unique situation here, and I think kind of across a lot of sea level rise scientists and climatologists, where they're being kind of forced into the policy conversation, but that's not necessarily kind of the realm or expertise that they have. So going back to, in your paper, you say that many renowned scientists are looking at 15 to 30 feet by 2100, but that's really a far outlier, 2 to 4 times what we're seeing from the IPCC and the National Climate Assessment. So I know some of that information was available for the IPCC on ice melt, and they chose not to integrate it into the most recent report. So if you could speak to that a little bit, and also if you could give some more details on how Southeast Florida, what recommendation they are making as they revise the report that you said is just coming out, so the revision of the sea level rise projections for Southeast Florida. What's your high that you all have chosen for that, and kind of a little bit about the deliberation in the group, if it was contentious to raise that number or not?
Let me start with the IPCC. The IPCC is a huge number of scientists, many of which are beholden to governments. And so inevitably the sea level rise projections by the IPCC do not, they lowball it seriously. The last month before the IPCC came out with the 5th report and their projections, there was a big debate over 1 meter or 2 meter. And then the conservation, sort of the cautious groups and the pressure from governments ended up with a low ball. Again, they do not include anything of significance about Antarctica in the present projection. So I have, both in the fourth report and the fifth report, they have, as far as I'm concerned, yeah, they can get their Nobel Prize for the rest of the report, but the sea level has been lowballed. The important things that came out in the fifth report is that they say we are in this for centuries. And they just move the real seriousness down to the next century because of their lowballing. But they have sea level rise accelerating through this century and the next. And that's, again, the warming ocean. They also say we're within a degree of initiating the total atmospheric warming, of initiating the total melt of Greenland, 25 feet. And what was your other question? I'm good for one question, apparently.
Yeah, so really if you could just speak to the revision that Southeast Florida is doing with your sea level rise projections.
Yeah, I'm only involved with the sea level rise working group, and we have moved it up to 6.6 feet for the high projection. And there are a few people on the committee that don't know a lot about sea level, though they're scientists, and they are beholden to their jobs or government entities, and they have been trying to lowball things. But we're up to 6.6 feet. It's sort of a 3.5, 3.8 to 6.6 feet. That is sort of the zone that people should be planning in, but any long-range planning should be looking at 6.6.
Will Burns?
So, I start with the assumption that politicians are going to listen to the loudest and most powerful constituencies they have, and it seems what happens most of the time. So this role of public education as driving political decision-making strikes me as very important. But my question is, there's been a lot of public exposure to climate change science over the course of the last 20 years, and yet when you look at the Pew Center surveys, which they do every 6 months or so, and they ask people, of these 25 issues, where do you place each one of them, right? And when it comes to climate change, in the latest one, Republicans place it 25th, Independents place it 25th, Democrats place it 24th, okay? Given the fact that this issue has no saliency for the public, even those, and we discount the 30% that believe that only God can control this or that this is a plot by the UN. Discounting that, even the people that accept it, it's not important to them, okay? So from a practical standpoint, what does intensive public education mean? Is it more education, or is it of a different kind of genre to cut through this indifference to this issue?
There's so many aspects to trying to live life successfully for every person, and so many people are trying to hold on jobs and get their kids off drugs and all these other urgently imminent questions. This has been something that's down the road. I don't think those numbers would hold in Miami-Dade County and Broward County because we are seeing the effects of sea level rise. It's surprising the number of people that are actually starting to move from a low area to a high area or out of the area, and it's just starting. But and we are admittedly on the beginning of this sea level rise that we're talking about, even though we have had in South Florida about a foot rise of sea level since 1930, which is a 8 times or 10 times acceleration over the last several thousand years. We are seeing an acceleration, and this is the problem. If I offer you a scheme where if you get $1, if you give me $1 now, at the end of the century, I'll give you back, what is it, $5,000 or something like that. You'd buy into this Ponzi scheme. But the way Greenland melt is right now, it's just over 1 millimeter per year from Greenland, global sea level rise. And, well, that's not much. I don't have to worry about it. It's doubling every 7 years. Once you turn that into a Ponzi scheme-like thing, you realize where we're going to be. Jim Hansen said we'll be, if we do that every decade from 1 millimeter right in this sector, if we double it we'll be at 5 meters with Greenland and Antarctica. We're doubling every 7 years with Greenland alone. And this is why scientists are extremely concerned, because I don't usually bring up Al Gore a lot because some people, the hair goes back on their neck for some reason. But he wrote a book way back called Earth in the Balance. And chapter 8 in there looks at every sort of human catastrophe and collapse of regional civilizations and so on, potato famines, all these things. Every one was a little climate blip that threw the local or regional area into a mess, and it all failed. And that's what's going to happen. It's really simple. We're already seeing that in the Middle East, where a drought has triggered, in large part, what we're seeing there. So I think that's why we're talking, and I understand, you understand that the average human has so many problems to make it through life successfully for them and their family. But wouldn't you hope that our leaders, not our czars, but our leaders, would take the initiative to look around the corner honestly and not blame the Chinese and things like that, but say, let's take the leadership of this and solve it. We often solve things without it becoming a catastrophe, and this is just another one.
Paul Hensley?
It seems to me that the assumptions of how sea level rises is going to be really important. So,
Closer, please.
As you've identified, this idea that sea level in the past has risen in pulses, can you give us some idea of what, over a decade period a pulse might look like? Because it seems from that's more relevant maybe to planning on.
Yeah, I think we wish we could. We have in written human history, we have no record of this. So we have no guidance. All we can do is look at the geologic record. Al Hine, there you are, and I and many others have been doing this, and you can, if I misspeak, you can tell me, but he has 3 beach complexes out on the continental shelf and out on the slope south of the Marquesas Islands that they carbon-14 date 220, 500 years apart, and they're 10 meters apart. Well, 6 meters apart and in 220 years. So you had a raised sea level within 100 years, probably that's 6 meters. And to abandon it, you don't abandon something if you raise sea level slowly. And then he reestablished another nice beach and had rainwater, fall on it and cement it up. So those are pulses of sea level. We see them all across the continental shelf. 1 to 10 meters, probably within 100 years. Right now, I think that's the best we can do. Your turn.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, the rates that we calculated that occurred coming out of the last ice age about 14,000 years ago were as high as 55 millimeters per year. We're right now at 3.2 millimeters per year. So nature, all by itself, by having catastrophic collapse of the ice sheets, can produce enormous rates of sea level rise. Now, maybe we're aggravating that. That's why I asked that question a long time ago. That's when we had a huge ice sheet, Laurentide ice sheet, that covered North America. That's gone, for the most part, so we don't have that capability. But we can still destabilize Greenland in a very short period of time. The question is, can we predict it? And the answer is, I guess, by the glaciologists, no. And so we can have a very rapid rate of sea level rise occur over 5 years and then stabilize itself. Glaciers it's not like an ice cube melting on a hot sidewalk on a summer day. They just kind of go away gradually. They melt and then they stop, and then they melt and they stop, and then they melt and they stop. So the dynamics of that is not fully understood. And that's leading part of the problem. And so we're looking at these nice, smooth, rising exponential curves, but in reality, if that happens, it's not going to be smooth. They're going to be jumps, fits and jumps. And so can we survive a 2 or 3 meter rise, a 2 meter rise in sea level occurring over 50 years, and then have a stabilization? So I guess my larger point is that we still don't fully understand the science, okay? I mean, right off the bat, we said the science is well understood, and it's no longer a question. There's still a lot about the science we don't understand.
Okay, good point.
Let me, in the end of the last ice age, carbon dioxide levels were at 180 parts per million. at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, this warming had built up to 280 parts per million, so an increase of 100. Sea level rose from minus 420 feet up to where it was at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And we're a little higher than that, but now a foot or so. But now, because of the input of fossil fuel, burning of fossil fuels, we've raised it from 280, not to 380, but 403 or 4 or something, over 100 parts more. And what would you expect to happen? Nothing? That's what I can only call arrogant ignorance. It is. We have really kicked the bucket over.
Okay, Holly Greening, over here.
Thank you for bringing all these things up. I think education is critical, but I'm thinking that probably what is going to impact how people build on the coast is going to be the economic viability of doing so. And we talked a little bit about the insurance and how maybe unattractive policies or no policies may be something in the future. I'm wondering if the insurance companies now are starting to take climate change implications into effect when they are starting to issue permits for things right now or policies right now. So it seems that that's going to be much more likely than a change in the Constitution or education is going to be the pocketbook.
And Holly and Kelly, don't you think that it would be the responsibility of communities to warn people, because you understand what's coming, of the risk of buying in low-lying areas or coastal areas that we may not be able to maintain renourishment for, to keep a beach and to keep your land safe? Why aren't we doing that? The poor Iowa pig farmer that works his life up north and retires down here thinking he's getting an investment for his kids and his grandkids, and then he's duped, basically, because we know what's going on now. We don't know if it's going to be 4 feet, 6 feet, or 30 feet by the end of the century. We know possibly within his purchasing time, 30, 40 years, that he may not be able to do anything with that property, including live there. I think that's a responsibility.
In about a month, we'll be in Toms River, New Jersey. They're going to spend approximately, we're told, $2 billion to reconstruct the events of Hurricane Sandy. The insurance companies no longer are issuing municipal insurance for fire stations, water systems, because they do not believe that the climate change program available in that community meets any rational standard. As part of your answer.
And that's where
we should deal with some great questions from the audience. We'll try to condense them quickly because of time. We have about half an hour left. And I lost the question. Wait a minute. Why do you insist that all, capital ALL, global warming is due to human burning of fossil fuels? Wouldn't it be easier to get buy-in if some natural phenomena were also responsible? People hate to be blamed, hate to be guilty, and would help nature if they could. Would somebody like to identify themselves? Here with this lady behind you.
What was that last part of the sentence?
People would like to help nature if they felt they could. This lady is behind, right here.
Hello. Yeah, unfortunately, if you put in all the natural processes through the last century or so, they would have our climate going like this. It is only when you add in the excess greenhouse gases from the burning of fossil fuels that you see the warming that has occurred. So, yeah, I think most of us wake up every day saying maybe something real has happened that shows that we were on the wrong track or something is going to offset this. It's not happening. It's not correct. Since all the climate scientists say that since about 1950, we have been controlling climate. It's as simple as that. You will see El Nino years where the wind changes, the rainfall patterns change. There was a period in, what was it, 2009, when the ocean level started to drop a few millimeters. And the deniers said, oh, it's over. Well, no. There were big rains in the Amazon, in Australia and a few other places, and water was transferred from the ocean to the land. It's run back. So we see this little blip in the sea level rise, and now it's back and on course. And there's also the denier approach that, well, our atmosphere stopped warming for a decade. Now, as I showed you in the first slide, it's a mixture of the whole Earth, the atmosphere and the ocean. And sometimes a lot of heat is being taken up by the oceans, and other times it's accumulating in the atmosphere. It's one big system. There was no slowdown.
A couple of questions I can combine. What impacts do you see on surface water and groundwater contamination?
What about it?
From sea rise?
Yeah, what Southeast Florida did is we drained the Everglades with these big canals, and then we found that in the dry season, salt water was getting in. So what we did is we put barriers there, and so we control the water level. You have to keep about 1.5 feet above mean sea level to prevent saltwater intrusion. And as sea level rises, we're within 8 inches of having 65% of our water control structures fail, meaning either we're going to start flooding out communities to maintain that 1.5 foot difference, or we're going to keep the water levels there and have fresh water levels there and have saltwater intrusion. With 2 feet of sea level rise, Southeast Florida will have no fresh water. We will be borrowing it from you.
Whose question was that? I forgot to ask.
Pollution. Can I just add a pollution thing?
Over here. Yes.
Can I just add a pollution thing?
Sure.
One of my biggest concerns, we talk about ourselves and which we've been doing, we forget as this land is inundated, there are so many dumps and industrial waste sites that will be the ocean. And we cannot afford to leave a polluted, shallow marine environment for our grandchildren. That should be front and center in our responsibility to future generations.
How important do you find the commercial communities in Florida who rely on tourism to be engaged in this conversation? Whose question was that? Somebody's?
Well, they are, in Miami Beach, they are the tourists. It's the reverse. It's the tourists that are letting them put out their $400 million short-term fixes. So I have a poster a kid at Broward Community College made for a Sierra Club talk I gave, and it has a snorkeler down there. You can see his boat up above, and there's a nice house out in West Kendall he's snorkeling through. So I think we'll probably have, it will be a new kind of tourism somewhere in our future, unfortunately.
Great time to get in early on that. Huh? And finally, are there any is the geological makeup of Pinellas County particularly relevant to any of the options you see for addressing sea rise? Question?
Go ahead. You know about Pinellas?
Anybody?
Al can probably answer that best.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, Pinellas County, like all of Florida, is low, topographically low, so there's going to be flooding. And you can just do the bathtub ring trick. That's the first order. Okay, sea level comes up 6 feet. Where's the 6 foot topographic line? That's where the ocean is going to be, or the shoreline will be in X number of years, something like that. And so that'll occur here. The barrier islands are certainly going to be affected. The mangrove seagrasses. Perhaps not to the significant degree in South Florida. We're a little bit more elevated in certain places. You can look at a wonderful map that the USGS has put out. It's called Emerged Terrain Topographic Bathymetric Map that shows that St. Petersburg was an island 125,000 years ago when sea level was 6 meters higher. Northern Pinellas County was an island when sea level was 6 meters higher 125,000 years ago. So there are parts of Pinellas County that are significantly elevated.
Okay, we now are depressed. So we have 15 minutes left. We're going to go over here and pick up some people who've been extremely patient. But it'd really be helpful, I think, if we start going back to what you're going to do about it. I think we got the message. There's a problem. Elena Jans? Ileana, sorry, my apologies. Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, so one of my greatest concerns too is saltwater intrusion into our freshwater resources. We already have a great burden on our local aquifers here, and we've been experiencing some concerns about that. As your paper suggests, we relocate citizens. how do you feel we could implement other policy suggestions to make sure that we can sustainably supply them with drinking water once we do?
Drinking water is going to be an absolutely huge problem, because as we relocate from sort of the spread out margins of Florida inland, we're going to be concentrating people and industry. We're probably going to be trying to go to more intensive agriculture, and we're going to have increased water demands. You know, I'm sorry, I don't know too much about how you manage your water here, but in South Florida, Broward and Miami-Dade County, we get it out of the superficial aquifer, we use it, and we throw it away. We do no recycling. Naples apparently does 94, 96% recycling. And we're now under court order to stop throwing it away. We do it by deep well injection or put it out on the other side of the reef out on the Straits of Florida. And that's no longer acceptable. So, and our governments are having a great difficulty in realizing the expense involved in cleaning water and reusing water. But it's like with everything else. We could reduce our energy footprint if we just do conservation. We could reduce our water use if we would just do real recycling. I don't know how much you do here, but and we should be much more careful about pollution, because we're going to be concentrating. Unless you go to North Carolina, then they're going to be concentrating. So I don't know if that's a good answer. But.
Sharon Wright?
I had highlighted in your paper the statement that to divert public money from hard or soft shore protection measures into funds to be used for relocation assistance, cleaning low-lying polluted lands, and removing stored and damaged development and infrastructure. Last week we had an event in St. Petersburg, and I got really excited about the idea with some other folks to start costing out the idea of doing nothing, and being able to use that to justify doing something. And right now in our community, and I think doing something, there's a lot of talk about doing things at the shoreline and for the seawalls. And so by this statement, would you agree that you're sort of positing that doing something at the shoreline and at the seawalls should actually be included in the formula of doing nothing?
There are a lot of things that have looked at the economics of the future, and if there's many things you can do that will encourage further development, and in the short run that might be nice, but you're going to get more people in trouble quicker by doing that. I'd be very careful. I mean, if people want to responsibly do their own beach renourishments, well, go ahead, but there's not going to be much sand left. And as sea level rise picks up faster and faster, we're going to overwash more, we're going to erode it faster. And we really, really should look at this relocation. You know, after Sandy, both Governors Cuomo and Christie were trying to buy out people at 115% of what their property was worth, because it was going to be cheaper to the state in the long run to turn that into public land rather than having to try to keep rebuilding infrastructure and so on. But the public pressure just, you know, all these, this is my heritage, my grandparents always lived here, and so on, and come on. Times are changing. We have to work with it. If we use all the money in meaningless defenses, we're going to have nothing left to help the people and the communities. One word I really dislike that communities are using is resilience. You can be resilient, I can be resilient, I can go to Colorado or Newfoundland and be resilient, but Miami Beach can only be resilient on Miami Beach as far as I understand. Maybe you can buy something up in North Carolina and call it Miami Beach, but we are here for a time. This is not reversible to the very best of my understanding. We have to reverse it, but it's not going to stop the first 6, 10, maybe 20 feet of sea level rise. We've put that in the mill in the oceans. And so we have to face that, and we have to look responsibly down the road, not just what I can do in my 2 years as commissioner or something.
Carl Nurse.
I'm wondering about how insurance drives this. Insurance is driving us to to raise our minimum building heights. That's a good thing, but it's.
You mean from the bottom?
Yes.
Elevated.
But I don't think anybody is raising the minimum height of the ground that you can build on. And so if you have a piece of property that's 2 feet above sea level and you say, well, okay, the minimum building height is now 2 feet above the FEMA number, which I guess is about 10 feet or so. It doesn't really do you any good if you build a house high on water or land that's going to be underwater. Is anybody around the state saying that? I mean, I know we can't build on wetlands, but is anybody sort of putting minimum heights as to where you can build at all?
No, I remember down in Marco Island or Keewatin, they couldn't build above 5 feet because the gopher tortoise were already there, so they were going to fill the area below up to that. So no, we're not doing that. And
Doesn't it have to be an early step where we start at some point, we say below a certain level, probably a rising number?
The other thing is, if you go look at all the fill we have, that's not stuff that you want waves and currents and storm surges messing with. That's junk, usually. It may have coarse concrete in it, but it has a lot of fine-grained stuff. It's not suitable material to have the ocean playing with. So it's not only, it's all the existing things too. We have a real problem with the stability. And if you've ever seen a storm surge go between two buildings, it will carve an 8 or 10 foot deep channel without batting an eye. And it has the potential of doing severe damage to the stability of buildings. Southern Key Biscayne has the towers of Key Biscayne. It's built on compacted sand foundation. It's 13 stories high. I don't know what that means, but I sort of chuckle when I think about it since I don't own property there.
Okay, Mike Mydell?
I think all I want to do is interject a commentary a little bit in part of the policy discussion. We must maintain our economy. It's the property values that give us the property taxes that enable us to find solutions and to do things. So I think it's important to have conversations like this early and use the funds that we are able to attract from new development to find those solutions and to find out, first of all, whether Pinellas County, because of its unique geology with clay layers and other things, how much of the county can be hardened. I know that in the long term, we're not going to change anything, as you say, about the long-term 200-year milestones, but our responsibility is to take a look at the investment that has been made in the community now, take that 40-year cycle of investment, make sure it's good for the next 40, and work through in those kinds of cycles and making sure that each person that's reinvesting in this community has knowledge, full knowledge before they invest, and then knowledge about how that investment is going to be used and used wisely to benefit the entire economy for that next cycle. So by shutting down everything now, you'll never have the money you need to solve the problem in the future. If you enjoy living here, you have to realize that most of the property value, most of the money that goes into infrastructure is obtained from coastal property. So we've got to maintain somehow that value of the coastal property long enough to do something about the problem. And that's where our money comes from. So, the only solution we have other than abandoning the area altogether is find a way to better invest our tax resources in preserving and hardening the infrastructure for the future and finding out which areas can be saved and which truly need to be altered in land planning as we go forward.
Mike, I understand what you're saying, and I understand that South Florida, Central Florida, this is gorgeous places to live. People are going to want to live here. I think we have the responsibility of warning everybody that buys in or invests in our community of the risks the community is facing, because otherwise you're going to go bankrupt by lawsuits, because everybody knows now the risk. It's the U.S. government projections are there. And if people didn't, the Iowa pig farmer didn't buy into that or aware of it when he bought, then maybe that's not his fault. Maybe that's your responsibility to warn people. You know, we're not backwater areas in a podunk part of the world. We're lovely places to live. People are going to want to live here when it's lapping at the door. We just have to make sure we don't waste all our money on meaningless defenses and as a government. And that the upgrades we do will be real ones and not Band-Aids. There are a lot of wasteful Band-Aids. I think you go take a look at Miami Beach right now. They're doing a lot of this to make it look like it's all going to be better. Another 6 inches, another 2 inches, it's over the seawalls, and it's back to where they were.
Tirasu Asef.
Thank you for your excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is if you could comment on some of the amplifying factors and, for example, what gets lost when we show a 1 foot, 2 foot sea level rise is in terms of the risk and damage that cause for communities is, for example, change in storm patterns and others that amplify this damage to the communities. I recently read some of the, I think it's a Nature article that's showing this, and we receive, a recent study actually showed our summer season is getting short in Florida. Those short seasons, we get a lot of rains, so the characteristics is changing. So in terms of damage, it's the other amplifying factors.
You mean amplifying results of global warming rather than amplifying things speeding up ice melt?
Yeah, from the, you know, the damage from the sea level rise
Well,
to the communities.
You know, the big thing that really has come out nationally and Al Gore focused on for a while were extreme events. And that's not sea level rise. And because that is another certain thing of global warming. And because it's simple, in the tropics, it's warming, it holds more heat. And when that warm water, warm air with moisture-laden air gets up to Boston in the winter, it has these horrendous snowstorms that beyond what they're used to. And the other rainstorms, like South Carolina, these are, you can never point to one of them and say, that's because of global warming. But global warming is holding more moisture, and it's sending it north to clash with cold fronts. And that's where you have these horrendous rainstorms. They're supposed to get 20 inches in South Carolina in the next few days. Wow.
Maya Burke? Maya Burke, excuse me. Okay.
That's the weather, and that's the problem. We don't know. I agree with that, but we have more moisture in the atmosphere, and that these increase in the number of extreme events are what is predicted from climate change.
Okay.
Long-term weather.
Dr. Wanless, my question is, in your paper, you advocate implementing the 1,200 strategies in the Southeast Climate Compact.
Yeah.
In our region, we've chosen not to go forward with a climate compact so far. And
why?
By your own admission, you've put out a sea level rise recommendation and people have largely shelved it. So I'm wondering if you can weigh in on whether or not you think sweeping policies like a climate compact are perhaps too broad and overwhelming for local governments to implement these actions in a meaningful way. And I'm just kind of interested in you weighing in on if you think incrementalism is enough.
Explain that last sentence.
If we can implement policies a little bit at a time, or if we have to start right at 6.6 feet and we have to make these, or we have to relocate populations immediately, you know, do we need to plan for extremes, or is incrementalism sufficient?
I didn't mean to say in there, I don't think I did, that you have to relocate it immediately. I think don't waste your money on the wrong things so you have nothing to help the people of your county in the future. The reason that South Florida went with a 4-county compact, and the goal wasn't to put out 1,200 things to do. It was so those counties could speak as one unified voice when they go to the state and to the federal government for influence and consideration and grants and all those things, rather than having different states, different counties come in with different projections, and the people say, well, when you all know what you're talking about, we'll consider it. That's why we started that. And let me reiterate that and I've been saying this since 2007 to the Miami-Dade County, the responsibility of the county is to the people. They need to understand the risk. The counties need to understand the affordability of maintaining infrastructure. After the Miami-Dade County mayor got back from speaking at that China-U.S. conference out in California, he came back and told the people, we are going to do everything so that our county will be safe for you and for my children and my grandchildren. He still isn't honestly addressing the people.
Okay. We have now arrived at the actual end of the time, but you had something passionate. Would you like to say it or throw it, or what would you like to say?
I was just going to say, I appreciate, no, I won't throw it, that I appreciate your answer to my original question and not spending money on things that may be useless in a pretty quick amount of time. And then the idea of extreme weather events and other factors came up, and some of the money for some of these hardenings or whatever are to protect from those items. And so you're sort of trying to balance the whole idea of what you're saying of where to spend the money, I think.
I'm not your community. Orrin Pilkey has been saying we should abandon every barrier island since the 70s. And I keep telling him, no, Miami Beach has quite a bit of infrastructure. They probably don't want to leave. And it's true. And I'm just trying to warn you not to do it wrong, because there will come a time that everywhere below 6 feet, 10 feet is going to move on. And there are calls for fiefdoms about building these little things. I don't think we moved down here to live in these little towering communities here and there. I think we like it the way it is, and if it's not going to be that way, we may be considering. Phil Stoddard has an excellent diagram, Mayor of South Miami over here, showing how property taxes go up until it gets too difficult to live. And then they start to crash. And then, if you didn't plan right, you can't help the people anymore. But you have to plan right so you can do that. People are starting to leave Bangladesh that 5 years ago said we're going to tough it out. People are starting to leave Miami Beach slowly because they're tired of having their backyard flooded 80 times a year.
Join me in thanking Harold Wanless.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well done.